I'd like to call the San Mateo County Harbor District Board of Harbor Commissioners meeting for April 20th, 2016 in South San Francisco to order. May we have a roll call?
Commissioner Bernardo?
Here.
Commissioner Brennan?
Here?
Commissioner Pierce?
Here. All right, now we're at the time of the meeting when we entertain comments from the public. And the comment that we have at this moment is from Brian Rogers.
There's so many people here today. Yeah, I've talked here before and on this very topic. Essentially, the high cost of bad behavior. I read in the paper the other day, again, that the district is now being sued by another employee who's leaving or who's left due to one commissioner abusing them. I mean, we gotta, at some point, y'all gotta do something. You guys see these emails going across the board, going to staff members when she's not supposed to be talking to staff members, and you're not putting a stop to it. You're not saying this is wrong. There's no emails that say anything that says, hey, stop doing what you're doing because it's costing us a lot of money. So, you know, you guys are basically allowing it to continue, therefore supporting it, because you're not saying no. And that's already cost the district, what, a $300,000 settlement plus $100,000 in legal fees, plus whatever we pay our attorney. How do you, in good conscience, let that continue to go? There's a clear path here that spans back multiple years. Investigations now, I find, reading the newspaper, because those weren't public knowledge until somebody talked to the paper, that have found that the abuse is really happening. I mean, it's not like you can deny and say, no, it didn't occur. Independent people have investigated and said, yes, it's occurring, stop it. You guys have said, you know, there's a clear chain of command, only go through the general manager, yet it doesn't stop. And people get frustrated with a hostile work environment and they go away. Some of them might have been a good idea to go away, but you can't believe that 100% of your office staff left, and that was a good idea. Knowledge went with them that you can't replace. And so, I mean, at some point you have to find a way to put a stop to this because it's going to bankrupt the group. I mean, that's the latest attack is how many ways can I get us sued? You know, from one commissioner. That's just got to come to an end somehow. And I don't know how you'd come to an end, but you've got to find a way because you can't afford this bad behavior. So, thank you.
Okay, item C on our agenda is commissioner
These
comments.
are things I'd like to have hold off consent. Thank you.
Do any of our commissioners have comments that they'd like to make at this time in the evening?
I would like to make a comment.
Okay, Commissioner Brennan.
So I wanted to comment, and I guess it's called a point of personal privilege. I'm not really sure what the technical term is, but I did want to say that I have responded to the accusations, and my response is posted on my website, which is on, if you go to the navigation that says journal and you read the entry there, you'll see my response. And there is a lot of inaccurate information. The information I've heard here this evening is not based on any facts. So I just wanted to make that point of clarification. Thank you.
All right, we're on to the item D on our agenda, the consent calendar. There's been a request to pull items 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. So do we have a motion to approve items 1 through 6 by consent?
I move items 1 through 6 by consent.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay, roll call, please.
Commissioner Bernardo?
Aye.
Commissioner Brennan?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, Okay, item 9, or item 7, our rent report. Let us go to item 7 and entertain Commissioner Brennan's comments on our rent report. Would you like a staff report on that first?
I think if the staff could explain to the public what the rent report is, that would be helpful.
Sure. Let me turn to it. So what the rent report is demonstrating, and I believe this is something we've been regularly doing now, I think this is the third quarter that we've presented this. And what it shows is the rents that have been collected year to date, what we collected first quarter, what we collected second quarter, and third quarter. It also has, for the third quarter, we've now broken down the amount of the rent that comes as a percentage of sales, because some of our leases have both a base rent and a percent of sale, and various arrangements about how that impacts what's paid. And then we also provided, to provide some comparison, what the year-to-date, that is by the third quarter of last year, how much rent was received. Then we have the variance in the variance column.
Okay. So I noticed here on the rent report, and the reason I wanted to pull it off consent, it looks like there is a credit here, and I'm wondering if it's, what the total amount of the credit is, and if that could be explained.
What I would do is, first of all, I'd have to look it up to get the total amount of the credit. I don't want to guess, but I actually could guess. I think I remember it was roughly about 14,000, but don't quote me on that. I want to double check. But what happens is, for that particular lease, there's a minimum base rent, and then there is a sales, percentage of sales. So quite some time ago, the management of the district and the then council had discussions with the tenant and agreed with the tenant that the correct interpretation was that the tenant would pay the lesser of sales or base rent. I know that's something that we'll probably be taking a look at. What happens is the tenant submits their income statement in around January, and that's when the credit is. So you're seeing the credit, which will work its way down as rent is applied against it. And January, so we have basically until this occurs again, we have till next January. And then I think, I expect that management's going to take a much closer look at that previous arrangement.
Is this crediting of a tenant memorialized in a lease agreement, or is this just some sort of other agreement?
There are legal documents, and I've seen reference, I haven't found the document yet, to an arbitration that occurred quite a while ago, quite a long while ago, more than 10 years ago regarding this.
And so a judge decided that we needed to give a credit, or?
I haven't
You don't know yet?
dug into those documents yet, but it's certainly on the radar.
Okay. Because it's this same tenant that wasn't paying their water bill, correct? Aren't we researching a problem with the water bill?
There's a discrepancy about the amount of water they've been charged versus what it's cost the district. We're in the process of resolving that, but we have not presented anything to them yet.
Okay.
And I'm not sure that that's unique to that tenant, correct?
It could, yeah.
Oh, it is for just for that tenant.
Okay. So I noticed here that, maybe I'm having a hard time reading this report. Catch Joanne Restaurant paid $89,000, and that included $19,000 in basically a tax on their sales. Is that correct?
Right, they pay a percent of sales.
Okay.
That'd be an example of a lease that's where we do well and the tenant does well.
Mm-hmm. And then I noticed that, for example, we've got the RV lot, which pays $19,000 for, is that for 3/4 that I'm looking at, or for 4/4?
3/4.
3/4, so, okay, 19,000 for 3/4, whereas Catch Joanne's is paying 89,000 for 3/4. And it appears that the RV lot is not paying a tax on their sales in the same way that Catch Joanne is. Is there a reason why they're not paying a percent on their, of their revenue?
They'll be paying rent in exactly the way that their leases shows it to be paid, I would assume. Right? Would that be correct, Clint?
I would assume that. I think one of the advantages of the rep report is, just like the board, we notice anomalies and look into them. That's why, as you know, both the general manager and myself, this is the first time, in the case of K&N, they received that credit under our watch, and we've been looking into it. So, I mean, this report is one of the many tools that helps us to do that, and we're glad to have it. But certainly if we noticed a variation and we couldn't easily explain it by, like, the poor fishing season or something like that, then we would look into it further.
Yeah.
And then I noticed here that the, for example, the Maverick Surf Company, their 3/4 rent is $19,177, which is really similar to the amount of the RV lot, which is $19,170. But I would imagine that the revenue coming in from the RV lot, it's got to be, what do we think the revenue coming in is?
It would only be a guesstimate at this point. I don't have that number, but I believe both these rents, and correct me if I'm wrong, Glenn or Yvonne, I believe both these leases rather are base rent and then percentage rent, and the percentage rent only kicks in if that percentage rent exceeds the base rent. So if percentage rent hasn't exceeded the base rent, then only the base rent would be paid.
Of the RV lot?
I didn't write the lease, and I know that it's a low percentage. I don't recall exactly what it is. I would expect to see something in the neighborhood of 8% or something like that, but I believe it's considerably lower than that.
Wait, I don't understand. How does that work again?
The lease will say that there is a base rent, which they pay regardless. And then the standard procedure, what I'm used to is a base rent is paid at the beginning of the month in advance. And then at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter, there's a reconciliation of percentage rents. So they provide a sales report and a percentage of that. And if that percentage rent exceeds the base rent, then that percentage is paid in arrears on sales already occurred. If that percentage rent does not exceed the base rent, then there would be no additional monies due.
I didn't think either one of these businesses paid up what we call percent rent, or the tax on sales.
Well, it's not a tax on sales, it's a percentage rent, and because no number is shown doesn't mean that it's not included in the rent, or in the lease rather.
In the lease.
All it means is that that number did not exceed the base rent in the period that's being reported.
But certainly the amount of revenue generated at the RV lot would exceed $19,000 in 3/4.
But it would be a factor of the way the lease was written when that lease was first written.
Which means that they don't have to pay the percent rent.
Which means that the base rent is greater, it would appear, than the percentage rent that was calculated. So if you've got
That doesn't make sense to me. Can you?
Well, if you've got a base rent of $500 and your sales are 5,000 and you've got to pay 20% of your gross sales as rent or the base rent, whichever is greater, then, and I'm exaggerating these numbers deliberately, 500 versus 20% of 5,000, which is 1,000, then you would pay 1,000. But if you've got a $500 base rent and $5,000 worth of sales, and your lease says you'll only pay 1% of your gross sales, then that 5,000 delivers $50, which is less than the 500, so the rent paid is $500.
But it's my understanding that with the RV lot, there was a lawsuit and a decision made that that tenant didn't have to pay any percent rent at all.
I don't know that, okay.
I will say that on that, I've done what I would call is a bit more of a cursory, going through the leases, looking at all the documents that we have in our file. And all that I know is that there isn't anything that indicates that they don't pay any base rent in any situation. The question is whether they pay, don't pay any percentage of sales. The question that was discussed between the two parties, us and the tenant, years ago, was whether or not they pay the lesser of base rent for sales, or as is the case in the leases I'm more familiar with, and probably the general manager's more familiar with, you pay whichever is higher. And that was a discussion that happened some time ago. I've seen only some, been able to see only some documentary evidence that that discussion took place, but it's not the whole record, as the general manager was implying, and that's why it's something that we're going to have to look into before the next round of income reports.
Okay. Thank you for that, explaining that. So, it just seems like there needs to be greater parity, and is this our second time now seeing one of these reports? Third, okay. And I think
It's
that's
the first time since an annual income statement, so it's the first time you would have been able to see the credit situation.
the credit, yeah. Thank you for pointing that out. And I'm really appreciative of staff for putting this report together because it is illuminating and helpful. It seems like we should, now that we're all aware of the disparity in the various leases and the lack of parity, that we might want to do more than just look at a report, but maybe take some action to, come up with a plan for how we're going to bring the leases into better alignment.
I think this commission identified both a review of all leases and an RFP for property management as priorities for the year when we were discussing goals and objectives. Certainly, once we get past the budget season, I think we're going to be focusing in on leases and some of those issues so that we can present better and more comprehensive information to the commission so that we can go forward.
So, with the Oyster Point Yacht Club lease, it looks like they're only paying $1,000 a quarter. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then there's no percent rent there either?
I don't believe that one has a percentage sales because it's not considered a retail business. It's a yacht club.
It's a pretty large building.
I don't disagree.
Thank you.
I had a question. Does the Half Moon Bay sport fishing total include the passenger service fees?
I don't know that. I don't know that answer. I'd have to get back to you.
Okay. Because I was also curious where the other passenger service fees would show up in a rent report or revenue report like this. And then the other question is, has any discussion been started with the city of Half Moon Bay regarding sharing transient occupancy tax revenue from the RV lot?
No.
We do have a statement or a request for public comment on item 7 from the public. John Owen, please.
I just want to say I'm a big fan of half-moon-bay government. And if you think you're going to give me one dime of your transit occupancy tax, you guys are wasting your time. The lease for the RV lot, I can explain that really quick. It's a 50-year lease. I can't explain how or why anybody would want a 50-year lease. But that's what Mr. Paravano and Mr. Tucker did 20 years ago, 17 years ago, and we're stuck with it. The ideal is they got a base rent. The magic number is 3%. They got a choice. They're going to pay the biggest number. If their gross revenue, 3% of their gross revenue from a exceeds the base rent, they will pay the 3%. If it's less than the base rent, they just pay the base rent. It's a pretty straightforward setup, actually. There's lots of deals that are made up that way. Basically, it compensates them to when they're successful, they pay money in. When they're not successful, everybody gets a wash. Only problem is the most they'll ever pay is 3% of revenue. So when the RV lot is full, approximately 48 slots minus a camp host, we'll say 40 slots, times about $3,000 in revenue on that night. So the most the RV that they'll ever pay the harbor district will be 3% of that. $90. Yeah, $90. The yacht club is a really interesting story. I've asked for the lease. As far as I can tell, I don't believe you were here when I asked for it. You were. But there is no lease that has been supplied to me. There is no explanation for why a private club is given that facility for only $360 a month. If you look at their website, they don't do anything that appears to be charitable. Their website is way behind. It doesn't have any updates hardly since 2013. If you listen to what the city of South San Francisco has to say about them, the only thing they could say for the yacht club is that they throw a good party. That's it. So I understand if this was a charitable organization that was plowing money back into the community or back into the sport or something like that, and it would make sense for us to subsidize their parties. But frankly, what it appears to be is a place where on Friday nights they have theme parties, that they pretty much have a bar for themselves, that somebody is taking the revenue from when they do rent out the banquet hall, and it isn't the harbor district that's getting it, and it's not clear who's paying to keep doing the upkeep. And like I said, there does not appear to be a lease. It would be a really fascinating story for someone to explain how that tens of thousands square foot space with a nice kitchen and bar pays only $360 a month, which works out to about $12 per night. Thank you.
Okay, just as a scrivener's note, also on Pillar Point Seafood, it says OPM, so I guess we ought to switch that to PPH. All right, concluding item 7 and moving on to item 8. Is there a motion to approve item 7?
Move to approve.
I'll second.
Roll call.
Commissioner Bernardo?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Meara?
Aye.
Commissioner Gonzalez?
Aye.
President Toots?
Aye. Item 8, Regional Government Services Contract Extension through June 30th, 2017, Sixth Amendment. Commissioner Brennan asked to have this item pulled, so Commissioner Brennan, could you start?
I'd just like to hear the staff report. That's why I
Okay,
pulled it.
staff report on item 8.
Certainly, this is the, as the staff report says, this is the 6th extension to the RGS contract. As the commission knows, we have been working on recruitments, and I think the telling part in this staff report is the steady decrease to the point that by the time we get to October, we're anticipating maybe $5,000 a month through June 17. So this This is a long extension. It does take us through June 30th of 2017. But as you can see, again, 80,000 will be expended through June of this fiscal year, and then we see those numbers dropping in the next fiscal year, 40,000 in July, 20,000 August, 15,000 in September, and then on from there through the end of the fiscal year.
I just pulled this because I noticed that I didn't realize we had 8 consultants working for the district that are through RGS, and I just wanted to hear the staff report, so thank you for that.
Okay, Commissioner Corrali.
So Steve, thanks for the report. So this is the second time since I've been on the board that we've had an extension, right? So the first one, I think, goes through the end of this month.
Correct.
So how many more extensions do you think we'll need? And it sounds like, based on all of these 6 amendments, am I reading this correctly, that it's a total of 600,000 over the last 2 years?
Correct.
Okay. But how many more extensions do you think we will need?
Well, as I mentioned, Commissioner Corrali, I see that by the time we get to October thereabouts, we're going to be down to, $5,000 a month. We did, if you recall, eliminate the human resources manager. So we want to be able to tap into a resource for a human resources professional. I would like to see what particular skill sets our Director of Administrative Services brings when we recruit for that position. And maybe we won't need that external support, maybe we will, I mean, certainly come back to you. But if there was another extension, it would be we would be bringing it to this commission in the spring of 2017, or late spring in 2017. And it would be in that small neighborhood. And I say that optimistic that we will be successful in our recruitments.
Okay. I mean, at some point, there's a diminishing return, right?
Yes, I mean,
And
what
so I
you're
don't
seeing in the
want us to
staff
get
report
to-
is it's 2, 2, 2, 2, 2.
Right.
It's 80, 40, 20, 15, and then cruising
Okay.
at 5,000 a month on from there.
Great, thanks.
At the same time, it should be noted that many prior fiscal anomalies have been corrected by the experience provided by RGS, and many new operations have been implemented, so it's seriously a valuable tool for the Harbor District as we build and correct things that existed in the past and build new paths forward for the Harbor District to continue to strive forward. So, hearing no more comments, is there a motion to approve item 8?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, roll call, please.
Commissioner Bernardo?
Aye.
Commissioner Brennan?
Aye.
Commissioner Crowley?
Aye.
President Mateo?
Aye. Item 9, increase agreement with Cox, Wooden, Lerner, Griffin, Hanson, and Poulos in the Spirit of Sacramento issue by $3,000 for a new not-to-exceed amount of $53,000. Staff report, please.
Yes, thank you, Commissioners. This is an extension to complete the process related to the Marshall sale for the vessel that we seized in January. We got a court decision back in January, and consultation with the attorneys representing us in this matter assured me that this would be the last time after we wanted to, if there were any additional costs, basically they would eat it. So this is an opportunity to finish this up. We're almost there. We're in a process now. I'm having conversation. We selected a broker. The broker has recommended that we do a survey. And so there's, the broker, these will be part of the administrative costs that we would be reimbursed from after the sale of the vessel. Conversation with this broker indicates that there's a lot of interest in this vessel, so that we're optimistic that we'll recoup the money that we're owed for berthing fees. Unfortunately, as I understand it, we're not entitled to any legal fees, but we could petition the court, and that could possibly happen, but it's not guaranteed.
And this item was asked to be pulled by Commissioner Brennan, so Commissioner Brennan?
Oh, thank you. Well, I I think we've heard that before, that this is gonna be the last time, but sounds like we're getting close, that's good. And, how long have we had this boat now?
It predates me.
20,
13, I
13?
think, is the date it came originally on our dock.
They paid, I believe the story is they paid when they first arrived, and that was it.
I remember the meeting, Commissioner Bernardo, you were there, we were both there. The meeting when this was first brought to the board, and it was put on as an emergency item, that there was this tremendous opportunity to, in an emergency, allow this vessel to dock at Oyster Point. And the captain came, as a matter of fact, and spoke to the board about his big plans for his business and how it was going to be a vessel that would take people out in the bay, and talked about, you know, the location being perfect and whatnot. And our staff at the time made a really strong recommendation, I believe it was our harbor master, that this was a really good opportunity for the district. And the public was very concerned. I remember the public comment, and there were a number of people who didn't think it was appropriate to have this as an emergency item, that it should have been something that the staff gave more thought to at the time. And I understand nobody currently on staff was with the district at the time, but I voted based on the recommendation of staff. And this is one time where I really wish I'd voted differently. I don't think it would have made a difference in the outcome, but I regret that we got into this situation, and I appreciate the staff working on, you know, consistently working on trying to find a resolution. So thank you for that.
Only comment I would make, and it's interesting, somebody wants to do a survey, because they're not gonna be able to haul it out, as far as I know, so it'll be a in-the-water survey, which is somewhat partial. Is there any other commissioner comments? Hearing none, motion to approve item 9, to increase the fees due to Cox, Wooten, Lerner et al. By $3,000.
I'll second.
Well, I'll move. There wasn't a motion. You asked for a motion. I'll move.
Okay, motion's been moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Bernardo?
Aye.
Commissioner Brennan?
Aye.
Commissioner Frawley?
Aye.
President Mateusz?
Aye. Okay, item 10, approve resolution 9-16, authorizing the general manager to execute an amendment to the GHD contract in the amount of $3,094.44 for a new, not to exceed amount, $107,090.44. Staff report, please.
Okay, thank you, commissioners. This is a separate issue from the item that was brought 2 weeks ago, just to make it clear. The item 2 weeks ago was the initiation phase 1 design. This is the final invoice associated with the emergency repair, the design associated with it, rather than the emergency repair. Back in September, staff brought before you an item to increase a contract by $26,000 and some dollars. There's a spreadsheet there. $26,906. But as you can see, or the original request was for $43,000. When staff looked at the bill that had been paid, they saw that there was about $17,000 left. Doing the math, we only needed $27,000 left to do this. But what they did not consider was that there were some unpaid or otherwise unprocessed invoices in this queue. So when we get down to now the final invoice, the work had been done, we authorized the work to be done, everybody believing we had board authority to do and pay this, but now we've gotten down to it. And as you can see in the spreadsheet, based on what the board has authorized, it's less than $350 left. We've got a $3,400 invoice to pay. So rather than confuse the issue by rolling any costs into the new contract. It's clearer and cleaner and probably more legal to do it this way. So the idea being, we need you all to approve this minor increase in that contract so that we can close that project out. And as I pointed out in the staff report, they originally asked for $43,000 additional. In reality, they got it done for about $30,000, so we've arguably saved $13,000 over what they originally requested. So that I'm prepared to answer any question.
Thank you. Commissioner Brennan asked to have this item pulled, so Commissioner Brennan's comments, please.
I wanted to thank the staff for including this list of checks that we have spent on the cost for the engineering related to this project. Although this doesn't include what we've spent on the actual build-out, right?
Correct, there's no construction cost.
What were the construction costs?
I think last week we estimated about $100,000. I have to look into further.
Okay, so we're up to about 200,000
Round figures, yeah.
in the project. Okay. This is helpful. Again, I'd like to really urge the staff to have the engineer come and give a presentation to the board. I think if we had done that earlier in this project, when it first started back in 2014, that we wouldn't have spent nearly this amount of money with so little results. I think it would help streamline the process, and we'd get better results if we had an opportunity to hear from the engineer and they could get feedback from the board and from the public. Clearly there were some decisions made that are regrettable, and I think we have really not done a good job on this one and looking out for the taxpayers. So I think that the current staff is correcting that, and I do appreciate everybody's effort. So I want to make sure that the staff understands that. I'm very concerned about some things that have happened with this project. And it's for that reason that I'm going to vote no on this, but it has no bearing on the work that I think the staff is doing. I think you guys are doing great work to try to fix something that happened starting back in 2014. Thank you.
So just a quick question. Sabrina, just so that I know, because it was before I got on the board, what are these things that are,
Can't hear you.
oh, sorry. What are these things that are regrettable? I don't know, because I'm new, so if you could just tell me what it is that you weren't satisfied in terms of work, that would help me understand this.
I appreciate that question. I'd be more comfortable if you would ask me that offline, just because I think it's not appropriate to have a back and forth. But, we're talking with the staff here. I'm asking questions of the staff, so I don't really want to have a back and forth with the commission. But if you have questions about the history of the project, you could certainly ask me via email or, phone call, or you could ask the staff that.
Well, I'd be happy to, but this is our meeting, and I think that if there's a problem, the public deserves to know, but.
Oh, I'm sorry, you weren't at the last meeting, were you?
No, I was traveling.
Okay, I went into great detail, so please watch the video. I mean, I don't think these two want to relive what happened at the last meeting on this topic. So there is a lot covered in the last meeting on this topic, and you can watch the video.
Great.
Motion to approve Resolution 9-16.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Bernardo?
Aye.
Commissioner Brennan?
No.
Commissioner Farley?
Aye.
President Toots?
Aye. Item 11, policy 6.2.6, personal use of vehicles, vessels, and equipment, amend to prohibit. Staff report, please.
Thank you, President Matoush. In reviewing other policies that I wish to bring to the Commission in November, I came across this one and felt that it was a simple fix, unlike the other one I was looking at, and so I bring it to you, the policy as written allowed for, with the general manager's approval, the personal use of vehicles, vessels, and equipment belonging to the district. This policy simply, the policy change is simply to eliminate a lot of language and to rewrite the policy as, with the exception of office equipment, which use may be allowed on a limited basis. The personal use of district vehicles, vessels, and equipment is not allowed. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Brennan requested to have this item pulled. Commissioner Brennan, your concerns, please.
I just wanted to thank the staff for updating this policy. And I know that we have a number of policies that need to be reviewed and updated. And nobody on the board asked the staff to review and update this policy. And so I just really appreciate the initiative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hearing no further comments, motion to approve item 11.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Commissioner Bernardo?
Aye.
Commissioner Brennan?
Aye.
Commissioner Frawley?
Aye.
President Mateo?
Aye. All right, moving on to discussion for tonight's meeting, item E, number 12. This has to do with adoption of the San Mateo County Harbor District preliminary budget for 2016 and 17 fiscal year. May we have a staff report?
I'll start with this very briefly. Thank you, President Matoush, Commissioners. This is the preliminary budget that staff is recommending the Commission adopt. We did distribute today a revised staff report. That's going to be reflected in the presentation we're going to give this evening. And we're going to step through the sort of, if you will, the pyramid of the budget. And clearly in discussions with LAFCO, the grand jury, and certainly the desire of the Commission, the desire had been there to separate out our enterprise and our public funds, and we're very pleased to be able to bring to you this evening a budget that is divided in that way. I can't thank the hard work of Director of Administrative Services Glenn Lazoff and our consulting finance lead Yvonne Kitar, who has done just an outstanding job in teasing apart our public and enterprise funds. I'll say also that this is a first pass at that, and that will be a process that will be continually refined, I would say almost indefinitely. In looking at a budget, and we're going to start at the top level of the budget, the consolidated budget is basically a document that says, here's 10 million in, here's 10 million out, and here are these appropriation levels and authorities that this commission has previously approved. So that's the first part that we're going to look at. Then we're going to look at that one budget document separated out into public and enterprise funds. And then you'll see as a whole how those are allocated. Then we're going to drill down even a little further, and we've got the three departments within the district. We've got Pillar Point, Oyster Point, and administration. And we'll look at public and enterprise in each of those. So that's starting at the top and working our way down. Another way to look at it might be to think, all right, so here we've got Pillar Point. What are our public functions and what are our enterprise functions, and how are each of those funded, and what is the enterprise revenue that comes in, and does that support our public functions? And we look at that as a little microcosm, and we do that 3 times. And then we take all of those public functions, those expenses and revenues, and roll those up into that middle layer split, and we do the same with the enterprise. And we do that 3 times. And then we take those 2 and then we roll them back up again into the consolidated budget, which is the overarching statement of source of funds and expenditure of funds. As I said, I think you're going to see continual refinement of this process and the assumptions made. We don't count pencils and who's using pencils for what, but we certainly differentiate between revenues from slip fees and revenues from property taxes. So we make assumptions about how we're going to allocate the cost of pencils. And those assumptions permeate the budget for all of those things where it's clearly not sensible to try to figure out how to allocate the cost of pencils. However, it's certainly sensible to look at, for example, the cost of water at Pillow Point, to use it as an example, and say that if we're paying for if the tenants are paying for their water, then the water that we're paying for is clearly water that we're using to run the restrooms and the like, and this is clearly a public function. And so on that one, we wouldn't use some allocation. We would look at water in that instance and say that's probably all public. So big items we may look at separately, but other items we'll look at, and we've based it on months' worth of careful timekeeping by our staff as they have reported their time spent on public or enterprise activities. And then we've used that as a reasonable basis for the allocation of costs that are line items within the budget.
Just a point of clarification, could you explain the directive the staff was given on how they would divide up whether they were spending time on something public or something enterprise, just so if I was a staff person, I would want to know, like, did you give them a worksheet, or how did they know how to divide their time?
I think it sounds possibly more complex than it really is.
Mm-hmm.
If they're on the docks, that's an enterprise function. They're mowing lawns at Oyster Point, that's a public function. And there's an implicit and explicit understanding in conversations with staff about how those duties roll out. So I do think we could overthink it to the point where we could end up with a line item on the time card saying, computing and filling out time card took this much time. And I think we want to try to stay away from that while still using these broad brushes to give a good idea. We will continue to ground truth some of these numbers. We'll look at them and we'll say, well, this doesn't make sense, that doesn't make sense, and we'll keep refining it. And that's why I prefaced all of my comments this evening by saying this is a first time that this district has done this. And it's the first time that we've taken this effort to tease apart our overarching budget. And again, thanks to our finance staff for doing that. Is it perfect? No. Will it be better next year? Yes.
I guess the example I was hoping you would give is, what about our search and rescue services?
Public.
So if they're on the dock getting onto a boat,
Oh, I see.
That's considered
If-
public if it's related to search and rescue?
Responding to a search and rescue call, our call would begin at the moment they get the radio call. And that then becomes a public function.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay. Well, with that, now that I got the fun of talking about the big picture stuff, I'm going to turn it over to Glenn and Yvonne to talk through the details. We do have some slides that we'll work through as we, again, start at the top with consolidated and work our way down through the layers. So, here we go. Ready, Glenn?
Sure.
Okay.
I do want to start by calling out as General Manager did, the revised staff report. There was actually a rather glaring error that was, the root of which was a simple mistake that I had made. And correcting it resulted in reducing our expenditures and increasing our reserves. So it was a happy error to find, and I apologize for the confusion. I can go to the next slide. So we're going to start by looking at the consolidated budget. And what is important here, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time looking at tables. There certainly are charts at the end. But what I think is most important in this is for you to keep in mind that the area that's shaded in green, that actually is the preliminary budget that you're adopting that will be posted online, that will be available for the public to comment on. There will be more detail, of course, provided to you and to the public, but this is actually the spending authorities that limit the activities of staff.
as you approve them, and that's in accordance with our appropriations policy. On the next slide, you are looking at our sources of funding from last year, this year, and next year. And what is, I think, the most important thing to look at here is that if you look at the dark column, that's the contribution from reserves. So you see that in 14-15, no money was used from our reserves. In fact, money was put into reserves that year. And part of that, and part of the explanation there is that if you look at that a very small, as you'll see later in the show, not a whole lot of capital improvements were done. So because work wasn't getting done, because many things in the budget didn't get completed, the money sinks into the reserves. If you look at this year, for the projection, you can see that there is a relatively large amount of reserves appearing, less than budgeted because, again, we didn't do everything we planned to do, but less than the amended budget. But if you look at the projection, there is a money coming out of reserves, and largely what you're looking at, though, is almost, although a small amount, but twice the capital improvements were planned for this year. A lot of what you're looking at is we went into the reserves to pay off the Department of Division of Boating and Waterways loan. And now if you look at 16-17, there you can see an even smaller amount coming out of reserves, even though we have what for this district is perhaps a record-setting, at least since the marinas were built, capital improvement plan of almost $4.1 million. And the reason we don't need our reserves that much is because the financial picture of the district is so good that our net operating, our revenues over all of our expenditures on an annual basis are able to fund, as you'll see in some of the slides later, half of these capital improvements. If I go to the next slide, so these are our expenses, and the big story here is, if you look at the purple line between prior year, current year projection, and next year, those are the capital improvements. These are our investments in our facilities. And if one looks at the blue line, it tells a different story. The blue, or maybe it's teal, I'm not so great with my primary colors, disappears in 16-17 because we have no loan, thanks to the decision that you all made at the last meeting. And really, I think what moved me when I was looking at this again today is that...
Can I interject for 1 second, just to highlight that point? This was a decision that this commission made at the meeting of April the 6th, and that decision was implemented and the loan was paid off, and the district was debt-free as of April 13th.
Yes. Which saved us some money because we actually paid it off about a couple weeks faster than our worst case. But what I want to say is what struck me as I looked at this was that it's really turning a corner. We have shifted from paying for work that we have already done to beginning to pay for the work that we need to do going forward. So I think that there's a lot of story in this particular slide. Next slide. Now we're going to talk about the operating capital budget by department. In many ways, you're used to this before. You've often seen our consolidated budget split between administration, commission, Oyster Point, and Pillar Point. As the commission knows, we no longer separate administration into commission and other administration. It's all the administrative department. And if we look at the revenues by the department, this might look similar to what you've seen in the past, but here's something that's different. Each department now gets an allocation of property tax revenue. Previously, in your budget, only the admin department received property tax revenue. Somewhere back in the district's history, the decision was made to present the district financially as an enterprise district, when, as you will be seeing later, in fact, enterprise meaning we get business activities. What you'll see as we go through this slideshow is that we are actually primarily a public service district that provides services to the general public from our property tax. And being able to tell this story in our finances is also, I think, an important turnaround for this district. So what we've done is, and as we get into showing what is how the public function, you'll see that property tax was allocated in a reasonable, fair, and consistent manner to the different departments to support those public activities. And that's why it looks like there's so much revenue going into departments that previously were only reported to you for their enterprise function. More on that story later, but as we go through the slideshow.
Just a point of clarification is, are we gonna see slides that show like more level of detail within the departments, or are they gonna just be vague like this, just a lump sum?
I think you will, most of the slides, based on prior conversations from the commission, are a bigger picture, but in the staff report, there are detailed down to the line item.
Okay.
So that'll be available, and those will be available, I'm running ahead of my story here, but those will be available as part of the public review period before the final budget. Yvonne is also working hard in the next week. We're hoping that we can get many of these tables, if not all of them, as our first presentation on OpenGov in, maybe even as soon as a week after we finish tonight, so that will be available as a way to view our finances.
Thank you.
But we really didn't want to focus and we can always change this as the commission likes. We want to focus tonight's presentation on blurry tables and small numbers.
Mm-hmm.
But that data is in the staff report
Yes.
And in the preliminary budget.
and in the preliminary budget.
So the next slide then being the expenditures by department. Now this pretty much looks like, as you've always seen it, you've got the admin, Pillar Point and Oyster Point, and dividing our funds how we do it. One of the things that's a little bit different, well actually it's not in this slide, I'm jumping ahead. So anyway, this is expenditures by department. Now we're going to get into what I think is really new stuff, separating public and enterprise function. So what you're looking at here is looking at, not by department, by the overall picture, our public expenditures being the top line, the next line being our public revenue, 95% of which is property tax, our enterprise expenditures, and our total district-wide enterprise revenue. As you look at this, keep in mind that there's $4.2 million in capital improvements this year, which are using $2.1 million in reserves, and that's what explains the variance between public expenditures and public revenue, enterprise expenditures and enterprise revenue. We're using our reserves. And we're looking at our revenues at a one-year snapshot. We're not going into the history of the reserve and whether the money was colored public or enterprise in the past. We're trying to keep the district's focus on going forward. Next slide. So here you can see at Oyster Point, public expenditures, the allocation of public revenue, the allocation of property tax, enterprise expenditures, and enterprise revenue at Pillar Point. Next slide. Yes, Pillar Point, you can see the same thing. We have, as you can see, we have a lot more public activity being measured at Pillar Point, and they're getting a great share of the public expenditures, of the public revenue to help cover that. The enterprise expenditures and the enterprise revenues at Pillar Point. And it's really easy to imagine that as we make progress as a district on our leases, as we get more, as our enterprise functions are developed, you can see how this benefits the public if you look at these bars. Because there's more resources available for the public service. Next slide.
Glenn, can
Yes.
I just ask you a quick question?
Sure.
I thought that this graph and actually the numbers were very interesting. And I'm just curious, do we know what is driving Oyster Point's enterprise revenues to exceed the public revenues? Because that's not the case with Pillar Point Harbor. And
I believe
don't-
in all of these, and it may be because of principle, but I think in every one of these, enterprise expenditures exceed enterprise revenue, and it
Right.
is
No,
driven
I-
by the capital improvements that we're spending out of reserve.
Okay. But I'm asking about the revenues.
Could you,
And maybe just clarify for me, Glenn, that the enterprise revenues for Oyster Point exceed public revenues. I get that the expenses are still higher, but, and I'm just curious, what is driving that compared to enterprise revenues at Pillar Point, which is lower than public revenue? What is, and maybe there's
Oyster.
not a simple answer, I just.
Well, no, it may be, because it may be as simple as at Oyster Point, the proportion, remember, the root of this is how our crews allocate their time. And much to my surprise, actually, at Oyster Point, there was a smaller proportion of their time, it was
Spent.
roughly 50-50, that was allocated to public activities than at Pillar Point.
Okay.
Also, we have many more capital improvements going on at Pillar Point, and that kind of, that
drives up
skews
the
these things as well.
expenses, yeah. Okay.
Did I address that
can I
question?
weigh in as well and just see if it
Yeah.
helps? So if we're looking at this one, for example, the second bar, public revenue,
Yes,
and the last bar, enterprise revenue. The enterprise revenue is exceeding the public revenue. I think this is the root of the question, is that
yes,
correct?
yeah, and
And,
it's,
and that would be, as Glenn said, because when we took those ratios and allocated for the first time the property tax revenues that we received, the enterprise revenue is a straight, here's the money that comes in.
Right.
The public revenue part is an allocation based upon how we looked at the time tracked by staff there.
so it could be just lower expenses then, is that what you're saying? Based on staff time?
Correct.
Right.
And
It
that,
could either
and that
be
helps
higher-
drive the other components of normal
Right,
operating
okay,
expenses.
yeah, okay, got it, thanks,
Okay.
thank you.
The next,
I think we did this one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're ready for admin.
Okay.
So one thing that this slide reveals, which you might at first find unusual, is that in administration, we're showing no enterprise expenditures. Now remember, formally, we never showed enterprise, in administration, we didn't show enterprise expenditures either, because we put all the property tax revenue there, and we put, as we should and continue to do, all the enterprise revenue in either Pillar Point or Oyster Point where it's earned. But there are enterprise expenses that occur, of course, in the administrative function. But the cost of administrating enterprise activities is borne by the enterprise function, so departments. So to put it another way, all of the enterprise revenue is reflected in OPM and PPH budgets, but much of the enterprise activity takes place in administration. So what we do in the financial world is we do an allocation of the support that enterprise, what breaks out as enterprise support and administration, and we reallocate it back to the budgets that earn the revenue for administration. Because it's important to remember that those administrative costs are part of what we want to recover with our enterprise functions. I don't know if I've been, is that clear enough, Steve, or are you still with me?
Commission?
So that's why,
Okay, so that, maybe now we can just, what is the next one, right?
we can move to the next one.
Okay, so now we've got capital.
Next picture. So this, you've seen many times in different forms with different amounts. But again, I think what's most interesting about this is that a bit more than half of our capital projects, 4.1 million,
is supported by our ongoing revenues. That's the big red section.
Okay.
And how,
Could we go back to that one? I'm not sure I understand
Sure.
this one at all. If you could explain a
so
little
this
bit.
is, this pie, if you will, this pie is only capital improvements planned for the next fiscal year. How do we pay for those capital improvements? Half of those capital improvements, turns out, those are paid for all of our revenues minus all of our expenses. We have $2.1 million that is available. We're using that for our capital improvements, which means we're able to use ongoing revenues to support improvements that are going to benefit the district's public and our
To
communities.
pay for 50% of the CIP.
For years to come, correct. And that's just because out of our ongoing operation. That's very good. A lot of agencies, as you know, as we once did, go into debt to pay for these kinds of things.
And also, just to add a little flavor to that, when we talked about the DBW loan, we talked about how we had hit that sweet spot of having healthy reserves and a low loan balance, because we've been paying down the loan. I think Glenn's analogy earlier was really excellent. What we've been doing up to this point is paying for work that's already been done. Now we're going to start paying for work that we're going to get to do. And so we have been generating these sorts of excess revenues, and that's what's been allowed the reserve balances to build to the point where we could pay off the DBW loan 3.5 years early. Now, looking forward, we want to take those excess revenues and put them into our infrastructure and get our reserves consistent with the reserve policy that the Finance Committee is going to be looking at.
The next slide, speaking of reserves, this is a slide you've seen before. This is a comparison of 14-15, the amended budget, and what we project how to end this year, which then in turn feeds what we think we will end 16-17 with. And a couple of points about that. First, we know that the cash balance at the beginning of July 1 was greater than the reserves that were budgeted for 15-16 because, of course, the year is done. In fact, they were 1.2 million more, and so I've reflected that in my projected balance for 15-16. That's an unaudited balance, but it's going to be, it's going to be close enough, very, 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 very close. That's part of what's contributed to the reserves. But I want to talk a little bit about, and that's very healthy, that $12 million in reserve that you see at the end of 16-17, that represents 119% of our annual revenue. And we will have that amount under these circumstances if we complete all 4.1 million of our capital projects.
Can you tell us what the restricted reserves are for these, all four of these bars?
Yeah, I'd have to look at the table, but the restricted reserves, because I didn't bring that slide, but the restricted reserves, remember, are just the Division of Boating and Waterway Reserve, and that was about 1.7 million, more or less, in 14-15 and 15-16, and it is zero today.
But we have restricted reserves for other things.
We have other committed reserves, yes.
Yeah. Can you tell us the total of the committed restricted reserves?
I can, if I could finish the slideshow, I can look at the charts that we have. And
Okay, great, thank you.
And they're also, should be in the information attached to the packet. But as I was saying, when you look at that $12 million, that assumes that we finish the capital projects, that we hire our regular hired people, what we thought we would, when we have assumed we've hired them, and I've made assumptions that were worst case from an expenditure standpoint, because I would rather that I predicted that we would spend more money than predicted that we would spend less, because you'd like to have money left over. And finally, it assumes that we don't get grant revenues. if all that if any of those things don't happen, like if we get grant revenues, or it takes longer to hire a position, or we don't finish all of our projects, our reserves are going to be even higher than are shown here.
And I think when we bring this graph back, what we can actually do, and I think this was Commissioner Brennan's suggestion to me earlier today, was we can take those numbers that are in our, that comprise our reserve total, and show it in a stacked chart, in a stacked column, how that $12 million is.
Right. In fact, I'm pretty optimistic that by that time, the commission will have an opportunity to vote on a reserve policy, and it will actually reflect the reserves that are in that policy.
I'm looking at page 22 of 40 in the revised staff report, and that page has a list of reserves. Am I reading this correctly? It looks like all of these reserves are committed or assigned or restricted, however you want to describe it.
Well, there's three categories, correct. Restricted means legally that's what you've got to do. The last column is what we had proposed for 16-17, and I think I'm noticing a little discrepancy in the total number, and that the one in this chart is lower, by the way. I think that the number in this chart is not correct. But we have a committed reserve for the district office that's remaining of 1.5 million. We have a payable liability of 458,000, a customer deposit prepayment of 533. These will change based on our year-end balances in our balance sheets, where we actually track customer deposits and payable liabilities, and then an assigned for unfunded termination liability of 3.5 million, actually closer to 3.6. The unassigned reserve then being the balance in this chart of 5.6 million.
So what I'm seeing is that the blue bars that are included here are all of these reserves that are indicated are actually basically already spoken for. Is that, I mean, they're either restricted, committed, or assigned for some, like, pay some liability or some sort of unfunded termination benefit or something or other. They're essentially all restricted.
No, I think there's a fundamental difference. The restricted, for example, referred to the reserve established for the DBW loan. We couldn't use that for anything else. The other funds are assigned by the commission, and the commission has the authority to move those funds around. So, for example, as we move forward, we'll be, and we've talked about this in the past, we'll be developing what we might call a depreciation reserve. And so, for example, if you approve the budget and we buy 2 trucks next year at a total cost of $80,000, and we figure they're going to last 5 years, then we will start setting aside $16,000 a year into a truck replacement reserve. Now, that doesn't mean to say that this commission couldn't say, well, it says truck replacement, but actually we need a new something else.
Mm-hmm.
And you could move that out.
Well, I do understand that the commission can always change
Yeah.
the way the reserves are designated, but just for the purposes of understanding what is restricted and what
Okay.
isn't, I think it's important when we're looking at a graph, like in the past when we've been shown a similar graph in past finance workshops, it's been made clear how much of these blue bars is actually money
Okay.
that we have agreed as a
Okay.
board to set aside for specific purposes. And maybe we need to have some extra colors in here
Yep.
that show us, what's committed, what's restricted, what's whether it's related to employee future benefits, or if it's related to cost of a potential, administrative building or whatever. there needs to be some indication here, because it's misleading. If one were to look at this without knowing all that, you would think, oh my goodness, look at all these millions of dollars that are just there for some unknown purpose at this point. I think we need a little bit
Yeah.
more clarity there.
We can certainly add that to the chart. The table that you pointed out, Commissioner, on page 22 of 40, does break this down, this $12 million down, and it's worth noting that the bottom line on that chart, the bottom row, is unassigned at $5.9 million. So almost 50% of this is unassigned by the commission, which is almost 60% of our annual operating budget.
So maybe we could have that as green and the
Sure.
and the restricted
We will-
stuff as red.
Yeah.
I just want to say, we definitely, I think you've pointed out a fault with this chart, and it certainly wasn't intentional to.
Yeah.
I think we should be, actually, this district should be extremely proud of its reserves, and I think we should be very happy to eliminate that.
And I think
And what,
Glenn takes too much responsibility in saying that there's a fault in the chart. I would just say that I think there's room for improvement in the chart.
Well-
We'll improve it next time.
well, speaking of responsibility, for those of you that believe in karma, when I said, oh, that number doesn't match, I was looking at the staff report I prepared that was incorrect, not the one that you have in front of you, so the numbers do match.
Okay.
So, we can move on to,
So now we're
now what we did here is, you've seen this before, the only reason we have it back here is because it's the second to the last slide, and we thought it was worthwhile to end the show on, the slideshow on, what it is you're approving, the appropriations that are there. But it's not the last slide, we have one more, and it's also very important because.
maybe we can walk through this one a little bit while it's up there.
Sure. Do people want to ask questions about it? Do you want me to
Or maybe
narrate it?
in a nutshell, it shows that we're in between enterprise and non-enterprise. We anticipate total revenues of about $10.1 million with our total operating expenses. We're anticipating about $8 million. There's that $2 million that Glenn was talking about that's going to go towards funding the $4 million approximately of capital projects. So if we take the $4.2 million of capital expenditures and the $2.1 million of net operating revenue, then that also shows the $2 million in reduction in our reserves for the year. So if we combine all of our total revenues and if we combine our total operating expenses with our capital expenses, then we've got total expenditures of about 12.2, and I'm rounding here, with a resultant decrease in reserves of about $2 million. And that's what's shown in that green highlighted column on the right of the chart there. So,
Next slide.
okay, next steps.
So, today, hopefully you will pass the resolution adopting a preliminary budget, and it may also revise it as you see fit. But of course, that's step one. Over the next month, we will have public input. There will be other items on the agenda. We'll be reviewing the budget at various levels. We're also going to take a first look at rates and fees being proposed for the coming fiscal year. And then finally in June, we will adopt the rate, fee, and budget and adopt the rate and fee schedule. We'll adopt a final budget, and that is the budget that we begin to operate the new year with. Of course, a budget is a plan, and as things occur, from time to time, there may be appropriation adjustments. You will also get that quarterly review. We're planning one for the next meeting that will help measure. It does two things really well. On the one hand, it helps to measure how we're doing on our spending. It also helps to measure whether or not we're succeeding at doing the work that we have taken on. Because obviously if we're underspent, unless we've been saving lots of money, it indicates to you that we've made less progress than we hoped. So I think this really does take a step at being a greater transparency for the district about its plans and about its finances. And what I am most pleased about is getting some movement here on this public and enterprise. And I have found in the last few weeks so many areas where this attempt to fit us into a square peg of a district that's mostly public service into an enterprise framework has done, I think, a great disservice to commissions in the past by making it difficult to explain what we do and how our money is used. So I think that this is something that will have ramifications not only just through next fiscal year, but I think also eventually allow clearer and more understandable financial statements going forward.
Well, speaking of public input that we're going to have next month, prior to us discussing at the commission level adopting the preliminary budget, I do have a public comment from John Olm.
Thanks, Ken. I should say that this is so much more informative and refreshing than how things used to be. I mean, I remember your counterparts sitting there and asked about reserves and deficits and whatnot, responding, what deficits? What reserves? And that was how business used to be done at this commission. Thankfully, that's not the case anymore. Back in the 14-15 budget, you can see that this was the projection for the reserves. You can see the red line. You can kind of see the trend, right? Pretty much 45-degree angle, straight down, not good.
What year did that start?
That was 14-15.
The decline.
The decline started in about 12. It went down, and they had a big bump because you sold off some assets. This is all on for you guys were here. So it bumped it back up. I made a mistake. Anyways, later on, the next slide that Ms. Galarza presented at that time explained why was the reserves going down such a steep angle. And her answer was, you were covering your costs by about 70%. So all the tax money you were getting and all the revenue you were getting from operations was only 70% of what it cost to run this show. And so you were covering 30% of your budget year after year out of reserves. One day we asked them about restricted reserves, and the next meeting the definition of restricted reserves had totally changed, and it become there was no such thing as restricted reserves anymore. So the one question I would really like answered is, what is the trend? I see that we're about 20% short this year, or for the next budget. Looks like we're bringing in 10, spending 12. So that sounds like we're spending $2 million more than we're taking in. Now, anybody that's ran a business knows that trend has to change. This board used to pretend that ignoring capital depreciation and stuff like that didn't mean anything. But as these gentlemen know, it means quite a bit when you have to deal with it 30 years down or 10 years afterwards. And when you talk about spending reserves, you should know that the ones that are committed, someone's going to pay them. But you guys can spend the money and claim you've done a great job. But then there's going to be another board up here someday that's going to have to come up with the money to pay for the promises that you have made to former employees and other agreements that you've made. So the question I'd like answered is, when will this district be breaking even? Basically spending approximately the kind of money each year it should be spending to maintain the capital facilities that it has. You know, and when it's money coming in will balance against the money going out, and we won't be talking about the definitions of reserves or how we're spending it. I mean, just the big overall picture. This is an enterprise district. Is it making money or is it losing money? Thanks.
Right, generally, I presume staff can address that in the future. We don't generally address public comment directly.
I could address it in the future. I could address it now.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, one thing, the term breaking even, if only it meant the same thing in all situations. Breaking even, I think over time as we begin to rationalize how we put money away for future improvements, and that's going to take some time, what we've proposed, what staff has discussed in reserve policy, what was put in a previous staff report, is we're looking at this next 5 year where we're going to spend about $22 million in capital improvements as putting money away for the future. And as we complete capital improvements, we're going to build a capital improvement reserve, assuming that you approve our policy, that allows them to be replaced in their lifetime. So that's where we have to start, because as you've noted, that isn't how it's been done in the past, at least any past that I'm familiar with. But breaking even, I think that once we catch up on these capital improvements, as I did some trends in slides that we didn't show you because we didn't get to the items last time, with the $2 million that seems to be regularly coming in revenues over expenditures, we should be able to maintain a very good hold on the public side of the house. And remember that 58% of our revenue is property tax. And as those of you that know property in San Mateo County know, yeah, there are some times when things get reevaluated. Generally speaking, it's a pretty good source of revenue, and that will very likely, we've only predicted modest growth, by the way, over the next couple of years. I expect that my revenue projections will be greatly exceeded, and you will see that money going into reserves as well.
Glenn, what is the growth? What is the growth rate of the property values that you are projecting?
When I talked to San Mateo County, they were using 5.8% a year.
Okay.
And we're
So it's gone
countywide,
up.
we're similar. I used a figure much closer to half that.
Okay.
Part of it is I want to wait and see. We get our second big property tax payment in May. When we get that, and I am able to sleep well seeing how much came in this year, there may be an adjustment by the final budget. But again, just as any of you would in your personal planning, I would rather have you prepared for less money and have a nice end of year than come up short. So
I think that's the better way to go, Glenn. I would prefer that it be a more conservative growth rate, just so that we're not being too aggressive.
But
So thanks for that.
towards Mr. Olam's question, I really believe that after this 5-year blitz, if you will, of capital improvements, I believe that the district is going to be able to demonstrate through its reserves and the state of our equipment that of our facilities that we're doing quite well. I do want to say it's not necessarily a great thing to break even. In 1450 we broke even, but it was because we didn't do anything.
Right.
So this is what the commission has to wrestle with.
So,
And if
And doing anything is not an accurate statement, I'm exaggerating.
Can I make a
did you want to make a
question?
comment, Steve?
Yeah, if I could jump in as well and say, we've got a couple of things, and I've got up on the screen a slide, and for the public it may be difficult to tell what's actually going on there, but if, for example, the commission were to adopt a reserves policy that said that there was a minimum unassigned reserve of $1 million, or about 10% of our annual operating budget, and the minimum total reserve required a minimum of $2 million, then we can see where we are on the left of the chart that's showing here. We're at 1415, and on the far right-hand side of the chart, we're in 2021. So this is implementing our capital improvements plan. This assumes a couple of things, significant things. It assumes that we actually spend all of the money that we think we're going to be able to spend, and that can be challenging sometimes. And it also assumes that we develop no grant revenues to help pay for any of the projects. If we don't spend money, the drop is less steep. If we get grant funds to fund some of the projects, the drop is less steep. But what we can see is that we started out in 1415, we had about $16 million. And by 2021, implementing our program, we're still at about $6 million, or 60% of our annual operating budget. That's a very healthy reserve. And even if at that point the commission were to say, well, we're not comfortable with these low minimum reserves, we want to maintain a $6 million reserve, then at that point there, all other things equal, we could say, all right, well, from now on, going forward, we are only going to do capital major maintenance to the tune of our excess operating revenue plus any grant funds. And as we've seen historically for the last few years, we are generating about $2 million in excess operating revenues. But we've been spending less than, I mean, I don't know how much we spent or we're anticipating spending in 15, 16, but made this commission budgeted $740,000 for capital projects between both facilities for this fiscal year. So we could triple that rate of spending and be sustainable once our reserves have dropped to whatever this commission is comfortable as a minimum reserve balance.
So the reserve policy is going to be pretty important to put together. And so I would feel comfortable, more comfortable if that actually dovetailed with the strategic plan. And I would feel more comfortable if it also went through that committee.
Okay, if that's something the strategic plan
I
committee
know
wanted
that
to
this was discussed at the
tackle?
last meeting, that, and I
Yeah.
missed that, but
Mhm.
but that's just me, I don't know how my fellow commissioners feel, but because we have to put a strategic plan, we're in the process of doing that. And, we've got buckets that we're looking at, and so I think the reserve policy should be, revolve around some of those.
A good reserve policy is a good thing for this commission to adopt.
I agree.
I think that we are in this sort of rather odd position of having monies where we wouldn't even hit any limits, I don't believe, if we were successful in implementing all of our 16, 17 goals.
Well, it's a
So I
good
think we've got
problem.
some time to work on crafting the right policy, taking it through whichever committees this commission wishes, and then bring it back to the commission for approval.
It's a good problem to have, but I still think we need
It's a
to be
good problem
very,
to have.
we have to be responsible.
Correct.
Fiscally responsible.
Yes.
But I do think going through the strategic planning committee makes some sense, but I'd love to hear what my fellow commissioners think about.
Can I make a comment?
Commissioner Brennan had a comment.
Thank you. So I'd like to comment on this
Sorry.
slide. This is a really helpful slide. Is this part of our staff report?
No, this was a slide from the presentation we prepared for the last meeting on April 6th. We didn't get to.
We didn't get to the slide. Oh, could we have this added because and put online so that people that didn't make the meeting could see this? Like put on
Yeah.
the website with this, to go with this meetings board packet or whatever?
Yeah, the other thing I'd like to do is make sure that, I think the 16 to 17 number is based on first look, and so we want to make it accurate, dovetail with what I showed you tonight.
So maybe it's gonna get updated a
I
little
would like
bit?
to update it, anything we put on the website.
Okay. Well, now it's gone, but I was
Right,
gonna
I
comment.
can bring it back in just a second.
Okay.
I'm just, oh, wait a minute, no. I was just wanting to scroll through to see what we had on the website from the April 16th.
Oh.
But we'll certainly make sure that this presentation is up on the website as well.
This slide.
Some of them, yeah.
Okay.
It does have some-
Could we see the slide again?
Yes.
Okay.
Some of these, I think most of these are also available online as part of the packet from April
Right.
6th.
Yeah, but we didn't get to it during the meeting, so it's
Correct.
not in the meeting video.
I'm just saying if people are anxious to see it
Yeah.
before I do my update.
Okay.
There we go.
So this is the slide that I was really hoping that would be included in this staff report, and I know I've been asking for this for a while, to have some projection out into the future of what's gonna happen with the reserves. And, you know, when I look at page 22 of the budget, is that what I'm looking at? Yeah, the budget. You know, if you look at the assigned reserves, like for unfunded termination benefit liabilities, 4,315,000, and assigned for customer deposits and prepayments, it's really important we set that aside, that's $500,000. And then we've got assigned payable liability, $2.5 million, and assigned encumbrances, 431,000. I'm just, once we get down into the, and I know we're headed down to the $6 million zone for reserves, we're gonna be pretty much at reserves that are already spoken for or have to be set aside. So I do agree that the reserve policy is really important, and that we start to think about ways of generating more revenue at the district. We need to be looking to the future and figuring out how to implement projects or work with what we've got to generate more revenue. And I think that's something that we need to focus on intensely, because once we get down to 6 million in reserves, we're just gonna, either we're gonna have to borrow more money, or we're gonna just be kind of creeping along in a position where we don't have a lot of disposable money to put towards maintenance and.
But actually, Commissioner Brennan, at that point, we'd still be generating, all other things equal, we'd still be generating about $2 million of excess revenue annually that we can put towards major maintenance capital projects.
Yep.
And if we implement our 5-year CIP, which, as we understand, is a rolling program, so this time next year we'll have added 21, 22 onto the end of that, we'll hopefully get to the point where $2 million a year in capital projects or major maintenance, certainly on major maintenance, would be sufficient to the needs.
So you're saying we would be caught up?
I don't know that we will ever get caught up.
Well, I think that's the.
But I think that we're not going to be, sort of paddling in place, so to speak.
We won't be where we are today, for sure.
We won't be where we are today, but I would go so far as to say that I think it's been, we are now the beneficiaries of these healthy reserves, but it's more expensive always to come in later when something has today's deferred maintenance, tomorrow's capital project. We've talked about that.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense to put the money to good use and put the money towards projects that are going to benefit the public. But at the same time, I also think that we need to be really focusing on ways to generate more revenue, because a harbor district, as it's been explained to me many times, is like owning an old boat. Everything breaks, everything has to be replaced, the weather beats it up, there's just constantly big expenses, and one little project costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. So the money can, get used really quickly without, sometimes these are unanticipated expenses. So I want to be aware of that. And I know at the last meeting, Commissioner Matoush requested that the Finance Committee review the reserve policy, and I understand we have a meeting that's scheduled to do that. But I'm certainly open to having more than one committee review the reserve policy. I don't see how that could hurt. I think it's a really important policy for the district, and any committee that wants to review it should review it.
Commissioner Murdado.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, since we're talking about sort of these really, in my opinion, high-level policy decisions about, what to use reserves for, how many reserves you should have. I mean, I do agree with Commissioner Chang Corrali's sort of view that looking at reserves and making decisions about reserves should be examined under the filter of a strategic plan. So, I mean, I would be totally supportive of having it also go through the strategic planning committee, and have them take a pass at it, because I mean these are discussions that go, I think, beyond tonight's meeting. It could take several meetings, I can see. So I just want to say that I agree with Commissioner Chang Corrali's view that should definitely go through the filter of strategic planning subcommittee.
And I'd like to just pick up on that comment. I think that one thing to keep in mind is that we are flying without a reserve policy right now, and that's not a good situation to be in. And we do need to get the reserve policy done. So I know that the strategic planning process may be a long process. I would encourage the board to consider approving a reserve policy quickly, a well-thought-out one that the staff recommends and that the finance committee weighs in on, so that we have something, but that we certainly could revise it. But I think if we don't have a strategic plan, it's really hard to, how is the strategic planning committee going to make recommendations when there isn't a strategic plan? You know what I mean? Like, are we gonna wait a year or 6 months before we have a strategic plan done to have a reserve policy? It doesn't really make sense to wait that long. So I just think it would be good to have a reserve policy soon, because that's something that is really important, and we were told by, I believe it was LAFCO, that we needed to have that in place, and so I'd like to move forward with it.
We have our next strategic planning committee meeting on the 27th, right? So, I mean, obviously, the sooner the better, but it has to be thoughtful and considered and not totally rushed. So when can we get a draft reserve policy? Can we have one by this, when?
I
don't
had
even
a
know when the-
draft reserve policy in the last
In the,
packet.
okay, but I mean,
Um,
to go to the committee, or to the board, should it come to the
I-
board
I
and not
would-
the committees?
I would consider, and I think that's exactly what will happen, I think that was the will of the commission at the last meeting, I may be wrong, but that's exactly what will happen at the next finance committee, is that draft will be a discussion topic, and I think it's ready. There, I, by the way, am not sure, these committees, strategic planning is also a standing committee, correct?
They're just
It's an
advisory.
ad hoc, no, well, it's
The only
an
reason I'm
ad
asking
hoc.
is I'm concerned that if, we're not having a serial meeting by having
Right,
three
that's
commissioners
my concern
discuss
around
reserves in
that.
2 different committees, right?
So when is the finance committee meeting?
Strategic planning.
May 4th, I believe.
Oh.
Well, the strategic planning committee is April 27th. Well, you're right, I mean, we're a little off topic.
Well, reserves, budget, I'm not sure.
Maybe we should get back to the budget
Scheduling, yeah, later. We'll do
and
the
talk
scheduling.
about reserves at another item.
Do you have a motion to adopt the San Mateo County Harbor District preliminary budget 2016-2017 fiscal year?
So moved. Second.
And actually, it's resolution 1216.
Yeah.
All
And
right,
I have questions.
all right, Commissioner Brennan.
Thank you. So first I wanted to thank the staff because this budget is looking really good. It's easy to read, and I really, really appreciate that. I was having a hard time with the last couple versions, and a lot of improvements have happened here. And then the charts and graphs are really fantastic. So really appreciate all the effort that's gone into that. It's made it a lot easier to follow. And I just had a couple of things. I noticed, let's see. I noticed on page 49, and I'm using the old version because that's where my notes are written. Under rents and concessions, there's a mention that next year's projections also assume that we would receive at least minimum base rent for Oyster Point Bait Shop, and that the commission will reduce unloading fees to $3 a ton for wet fish. So I just wanted to point that out because I hadn't noticed that in the previous version, but maybe it was there and I didn't see it. And then the other thing I noticed is that on page 13 of 17, towards the top, it says, regarding an ADA survey, it says that a change is that $75,000 for ADA survey as directed in previous CIP discussion has been reduced to 38,000 since second look. And I wondered if the staff could give us an update on whether it was determined that we could do that cheaper, or,
We're gonna see what happened there.
Can I
Go ahead.
rephrase that question if I may to Glenn? This is under contract services, and we have a line item for contract services. We plugged $75,000 into that in the staff report. Final sentence on that section says, this has been reduced $38,000 since second look. The question I would have is, does the reduction in $38,000 refer to the entire line item for contract services? Or does it refer to the $75,000 estimate for an ADA survey that we now believe to be $37,000?
I believe this, it should be that the latter, or the former that was done, it refers to the entire line item. But I will double check it, make sure that is accurate. I did certainly, if I did reduce that $75,000, that would be an error, because we did intend to spend $75,000 on ADA. I merely moved it from capital expense to consulting where it properly belongs.
But I believe that the reduction of $38,000 is in the overall contract services line item as opposed to in the ADA survey. Randy and I have talked about this survey, and neither of us believe that it's likely to cost any less than $75,000.
I see. Okay, thanks for clarifying that. And then I did want to point out on page 53 of 114, it says, staff will bring to the finance committee.
It's missing some pages, because I don't have anything close to that on the pages.
Our staff replaced the, well, maybe the staff can explain.
Revised one.
I'm
It's in
working
the
off,
notes. You're reading from the notes, right?
One and the old one is numbered.
I'm
She's
reading,
working off a document we don't have.
You have the document that was in the original packet. The packet total was 114 pages. Page 53 of that is the third from last page of the.
so it's in the board packet, it's the original document in the board packet.
The original will recall.
Yeah. And the reason I'm using that is because I didn't get the revised one until a few hours ago, and I didn't have time to write
I
notes.
have 53 pages in that one. So are we missing information?
So Steve, were the
Page
budget
15 and
detail,
16.
the budget detail notes were
Page
sent,
15 and
were
40.
in the online version, right?
I've got both versions. I've got
The
one
budget
page
detail
in-
notes
Excuse me, I can't hear the commissioner.
Just really quickly to clarify, these are the budget detail notes. Were they also, we just got the revised, but I know they're in the original. Were they included in the revised, the budget detail notes? I
The
thought they-
budget
Yes.
detail notes,
They were, I think.
And the numbers, of
I
course,
just
reflect.
messed them up.
Yeah, the numbers in the revised reflect the revision, of course.
Right. But anyway, the budget detail notes were in the original packet that's online, is that right?
correct.
And
Okay.
that's what, and I agree, I was working off of that too, because I've got notes on the original.
On your old version. I'm almost
So
done,
sorry
but I'll
for the
wait till
confusion.
we have everybody on the same page here.
Thank you.
Okay, so I agree it is confusing when we get new report right before the meeting, but that's where we're at. So I'm on page 53 of 114 of the original staff report. And it says here, staff will bring to the Finance Committee a reserve policy that will establish and maintain needed reserves in a manner balanced with district priorities, including financial responsibility, regardless of designation per recently adopted budget policy. Any expenditure from reserves must be approved by Board of Commissioners. Obviously, the Finance Committee is only advisory, and this was agreed on at our last board meeting, and I understand Commissioner Crawley wasn't there, and it was put forth by President Mateusz, so just wanted to point that out. That's all I have, and
All right, we have a motion and a second to adopt resolution 12-16. Can we have a roll call?
Commissioner Bernardo?
Aye.
Commissioner Brennan?
Aye.
Commissioner Raleigh? Aye. Commissioner Matthews?
Aye. Okay, moving on to item 13. CSDA Board of Directors call for nominations, seat B. Staff report, please.
Melanie wrote this, but I'll happily address this. This is a fairly rote thing that we'll see on a regular basis. The CSDA, the California Special Districts Association, is calling for nominations to the Board of Directors. The seat on the Board of Directors is open to members of the governing body or the chief executive of a member of the California Special Districts Association. At this point, the commission may nominate a commissioner to be put up for election to that board. The commission could also nominate the general manager. However, I'm reminded of who said, if nominated, I will not run, and if elected, I will not serve. I would respectfully request that you not nominate a general manager to sit on this CSDA board, but certainly any commissioner could. If you wish to nominate somebody, staff will forward that nomination, and then your name would appear on the election ballot when that comes to us at some point in the near future.
So
Commissioner comments, please.
I'd like to nominate Commissioner Paravano.
He's gonna love you.
Show up.
He's gonna love you.
Is there a second?
Shouldn't we ask him first?
As an aside, there was another election in my last district where the board of another body voted to nominate one of the commissioners of the Harbor District without checking with the Harbor District or the commissioner named. Interesting little situation. I'd recommend that the board nominate a volunteer,
Someone who's here.
somebody who's here and is willing to serve.
But I have a question. We don't really need to nominate anybody, do we?
Thank you, Commissioner.
We don't.
The option is there for the commission to not nominate anybody at all.
Since it seems that nobody here is stepping up to want to serve in this capacity, I would suggest that we just move on.
There we go. No action necessary.
All right. If everybody's in agreement, we're just going to move on from item 13. If it needs to be brought back at some point in the future, as Mr. McGraw mentioned, periodic reappearance of this item, we'll deal with it at that time. So moving on to item 14 is an item from Commissioner Brennan regarding the Tiger Grant Johnson Pier Improvements update. I guess we'll start with the staff report.
Thank you, President Matoush. Commissioner Brennan requested this be added to the agenda. I added it to the agenda. The Tiger Grant application is due a week from Friday. Staff's continuing to work on that. Randy is stepping up and doing some good work on sort of deconstructing, if you will, and then rebuilding the benefit cost analysis, a significant component of the grant application. We're working on the narrative. We've still trying to put together a comprehensive and compelling argument for the project. Had conversations with some of the stakeholders, and the message that has been most important to those stakeholders is that the notice of funding availability only came out a short while ago. The Department of Transportation does not expect a full-fledged project, and this is reflected in the fact that the first deadline, if an agency is successful, is September the 30th of 2019, when all environmental reviews, CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, and NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act, approvals need to be in place, and all engineering done. And then the next deadline after that is September 30th of 2024 for a completion of construction. So, especially given that this is in the Tiger grant scheme of things, a small application, the maximum grant allowable under this program is $100 million. We're confident that we can put together, we're semi-confident that we can put together a good enough argument and a good enough application that if successful, we will be able to fully involve all stakeholders and get a really good project description dialed in, engineering done, and environmental approvals in place by I can't imagine it taking until the deadline allowed of September 30th, 2019. But we'll keep plugging away at getting this application finished up.
Commissioner comments?
Thank you. So I wanted to thank the staff for working on this. It's really great that we are applying for the grant, and it's important. And I was pleased to hear that our general manager has sought some assistance from someone who has some experience doing grant writing and to help pull it together, because we are really short on time to get the application in. So that's great, and I did hear that there was some focus being put on revising some of the drawings that were in the previous application, because they were, I think both Commissioner Bernardo and I noticed they were hard to read. The drawings that showed changes to Johnson Pier and also to the entry and exit at Pillar Point Harbor. So I think it's great that those are getting updated, because that's sort of the crux of the whole proposal. And the other thing I wanted to mention is just that it would seem like a good time to consider making the fuel dock a permanent structure or part of the pier versus a floating dock. And I think that this sort of the standard these days is to have fuel docks on a permanent structure, not as a floating dock for safety purposes, because floating docks can get knocked around, and if one gets knocked around, then that means that there's a more of a possibility of a fuel spill. So because our fuel dock and our pump out station are both on floating dock, I think there have been concerns voiced about that in the past, and I don't know if that's something that we could fit into this, but if not, maybe another opportunity will come up for something like that. But it's definitely a concern to have the fuel as a floating dock. And then the last thing I wanted to add was just that I hope that we can get some letters of support for our application. When would those letters need to be into staff to make it into the application?
I think there's a provision in the application process that letters of support can be submitted after the application deadline. I'm looking into that, but yes, letters of support would be appreciated. I can certainly get back to you with dates certain.
That would be great.
But we've been focusing on the application itself at this point.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, we've got, I don't believe there's any action necessary. This is an informational item. So moving on to item 15, General Manager Report. General Manager McGraw.
Thank you, President
Oh,
Matoush.
wait a minute, I guess, so,
Whatever.
Yeah.
I just wanted to remind you.
yeah.
Certainly, I think the report is self-explanatory. It's in the board package. This encompasses the entirety of the calendar month of March. It does not reflect any of the activities that have taken place in the calendar month of April to date, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any commissioner questions at this point? So we do have a public comment on this item from John Ullum.
Before I forget, I know you're up, Mr. Lazoff, we're here to discuss a PRA request regarding redacted invoices. As you can hear, none of these commissioners are going to ask you guys to release those information. They're talking the game. They're not going to do it. So unless they actually step forward to the plate and ask permission for you to release those documents to prove what they've been asserting, you can go ahead and drop that one. And then the other one, if I understood correctly what you were talking about, all I'm interested in is emails that went through Ms. Raleigh's private email server. I'm not interested in every conversation she ever had with anybody in the district. I just want the emails that went through her private email service. Don't waste your time looking for anything else. Just look for vc@corrali.com. That's the search criteria. Mr. Miller, got a shout out for you. The Deputy District Attorney, Mr. Serrato, has really talked up your Brown Act training abilities. Well, it's about these guys. Apparently, Ms. Chang, or Commissioner Virginia Chang, Raleigh, likes to use not only personal email servers to conduct district business, but she also has figured out a really cool way that she can send emails to all the district commissioners in the same email, expressing what it is that she wants, seeking out consensus on a topic. And according to Mr. Serrato, because Mr. Miller has done such a fine job of training you all, none of you made the mistake of responding to what even Mr. Serrato characterizes as being the first step in a serial meeting Brown Act violation. Now, apparently none of you responded to Commissioner Corrali's demand to have a policy meeting discussing social media, nor another one she's demanded that you have a meeting regarding, well, you all know this, regarding having a policy for commissioner reimbursements. So, in case you want to know how to do all this, if you want to hide your actions from the public and do things behind closed doors and pass messages to each other that can't be retrieved via a traditional Public Records Act request, a personal private email server is the way to go. And this is not that big a deal to have. I can get you a copy of iRedmail that I believe installs on Windows operating system. Go down and get yourself a dynamic DNS name. You've got your own email server. Thanks. Congratulations, Mr.
All right, thank you, Mr. McGraw. Item 16, Interim Director of Administrative Services, Glenn Lazoff. Your report, any questions?
I really like General Manager's opening statement, and I'd like to just say ditto, and I'll answer any questions that you have.
Any commissioner questions on the Interim Director of Administrative Services?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, Commissioner Brennan.
So on the second page, it says here, regarding PRA requests, it goes into some detail about various PRA requests, and this is detailing one from, who is this from? I don't know who it's from somebody. Anyway, it says here, the reimbursement, this is the very top line, the reimbursement did appear on the claims list. However, the commissioner requested that we not make payment. Therefore, no payment was made. I think to be accurate, it should say that the reimbursement did appear on the claim list and was approved unanimously by the board. That seems to be left out there. So if you could add that for correction, I would appreciate it.
Sure. It's fine. I don't know exactly how it gets published, but I guess just add it to the packet. There certainly wasn't nothing intended by it.
I didn't think so. I just would appreciate if you could correct it. Oh, and I did notice it says reestablishing project with OpenGov. Could you give us an update on that?
Yeah, during the month of April, somehow or other, with the budget and all the ongoing activities, Yvonne Quictar here reopened her conversations with OpenGov and managed to at least have one or two discussions with them about loading and herself getting up to speed on how OpenGov works. I think that's what gave us the confidence that we'll be able to load up some of these budget spreadsheets in the coming period. As you know, she's new to that function as we've been in transition. So, and being very busy with the budget, she had to get started again. But I would say we've I would call it relighting the fire, but like much that staff does, it moves slowly.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a quick question. Regarding the PRA request, a couple of things. Who is the San Mateo Post? Is that another paper that I've never heard of them? And then, I'm just curious.
The Daily Post, yeah.
I think it means the Daily Post or the.
Okay,
sort of
so
Palo
that
Alto
should be,
Daily
okay. And then, I understand that PRA requests are part of the public process and transparency, which I do support. But I'd like to know how much it's cost us so far for all of the requests that have been made by Mr. Olam and South City. I know we've had maybe some updates, but I'd like to know what that current cost is. Time
Yeah,
and money.
it would be because we do not track staff time. That piece of it would be.
But our attorneys.
We would make our best guess at conjecture to do that. It would be a project to
There would
do.
be a project, commission.
Well,
if the
We
commission
would do
lets
it
know
after
that-
acted for sure, but
Would it require that you vote to release attorney-client privilege twice because of the invoices that might be involved in his doing work? If you want to tell us the
And
cost
the
of
other
what he does.
thing-
Any request for that level of detailed analysis of our costs, I would request comes from the commission as a whole, and I would request
Okay,
that
well,
we do it
it's-
after budget season. so
Yeah,
the
that's
finance
fine,
department
that's
can
fine. I mean,
focus
it's
on-
not that big of a deal, just, and then the other thing is getting
I
back.
will say this, one thing, the PRA costs are reflected in the public side of the house,
Yes.
in our
thank
public
you.
enterprise system.
Thank you.
That's good to know.
Yeah, so our tax funds are being used to fund this. Okay, so then the other thing is, I agree with Commissioner Brennan that the bills and claims were unanimously, that edit should be made, but I also think that it says, however, the commissioner requests that you not make payment after. I think that there has to be something else after there's clarification that.
But I will point out that the minutes reflect the bills and claims were approved unanimously.
No, I understand, but
And-
there were
and-
claims that were there, and there was a reimbursement request.
Can we just also clarify that this is 3 pages of a month's worth of work by the Administrative Services Director, and
No, I'm not talking about the PRA requests. Are you talking about that?
no, I'm just talking about, it's sort of almost understandable that these are sort of bullet point summaries or highlights of.
Right, but I
months of-
want them to be accurate. I think that if we're gonna say that the bills and claims were unanimously approved, I think that we have to say that the payments were not made because there was clarification as to the improper reimbursement requests that were not following the district's policy.
The request was not improper.
So it didn't follow the district's policy. So I think that should be noted too.
Mr. McGraw didn't follow the district's policy.
I will happily add to the report whatever I'm directed.
Well,
Well, it's just
in that
that,
case-
it's just an add-on to the sentence, that's all, the top of page 2.
All right,
So,
we'll see about
I mean, if it should be
adjusting
anywhere, it
those.
should be in my
Thank you.
report.
I
If we
would,
can
I would
adjust
just
that,
like
that
to make a
would be great.
final comment, if I could. I think to ask for simple amendments is okay, but feels a little bit like we're getting into sniping at staff, and that's not something that I think is appropriate during these staff reports, so.
I'm not sniping at staff, I just want accuracy to be in these notes.
Moving on to item
Thank you.
17, Randy Murphy, Interim Director of Operations.
Thank you. This is my first attempt at an activity report. Obviously, I was here for about half a month, and as we said before, I'm here to answer any questions.
Any commissioner questions regarding Mr. Murphy's report on item 17?
Yes. So regarding Romeo Pier, I understand that we've got the CDP and the CEQA in process. Is that accurate?
CEQA?
CEQA.
I couldn't hear your question, I'm sorry.
CEQA and the CDP are in process?
We're doing all the necessary evaluations. I don't believe the CEQA's actually started, no.
Oh, the CEQA hasn't started yet. Okay, and then I heard that the news is that there has to be a cultural resources report produced for the Army Corps. Is that accurate?
Army Corps requested an analysis, yes. So I've requested a proposal from the consultant that's doing this work for us.
So they're going to produce the cultural
They're going
resources.
to probably subcontract it, yes.
So it's going to be its own little report from a
Yeah.
separate company. Okay. And I noticed here that it says that the radon is that you're coordinating with the vendor for the retrofit, and I noticed it wasn't in the parking lot. So is
It's
it?
still up there somewhere, it hasn't been moved yet.
It's in the yard in Princeton. I asked Assistant Harbor Master Draper to find another place to keep it until we get it down to the roadworks in Santa Barbara.
Okay, so at some point it's going to be towed down there on a
Yeah.
trailer?
It's on a trailer currently, and it's in a yard in Princeton, secured.
When do we think it will go down? Because I know it takes like a year to do the retrofit.
Right, they're gonna be here Friday. Rather than make assumptions, what work needs to be done, I requested the boatmaster to come up here, since he was gonna be here in the general area anyway, he's agreed to do that, so he's actually gonna look at the boat, and we're gonna get a much better, more detailed proposal. I was not comfortable with, well, this is what we think it's gonna cost, you know, I mean, I'm like, no, let's get some detail.
Yeah.
Before we bring it to you all for approval, and he's agreed to do that, so he'll be here, he was supposed to be here a couple of weeks ago, he's, more recent conversation, he will be here this week, and, then we'll get a proposal and bring it to you all for authorization before we ship it down there, but hopefully we'll see that by the end of May.
Great, that sounds great. And then I noticed here it says that, that you had contacted the Air Force regarding the West Trail issues. And I wondered if you had any update on communications with them. I noticed that the drainage swale that's totally filled in
Right.
goes all the way up to their fence.
Yes.
So is that, anything outside of their fence, is that ours, or is there an area up there that's their responsibility outside of the fence?
Everything outside of the fence is ours, as I understand it. Actually, part of this new work that was approved last meeting for GHD is an actual survey. Where is the property line? We've got kind of a Google Earth with approximate lines. That shows the fence line is the property line, and so everything on the outside of the fence is our responsibility. I'm not satisfied with that. That's why one of the reasons why we're doing the survey.
To check. Okay, thank you.
Is there a possibility when they use those little sheriff's work crews that we could get somebody up there and just in a couple hours clean that swale out?
We could clean it out, but because of the erosion that's occurred on the outside edges of that, it's probably not going to convey much water anyway.
Okay.
So the goal at this point, assuming the study shows that will convey water if it's properly graded and all that work and that repair work is done up there. I've already talked to the Assistant Harbor Master Draper about making sure that gets on our list, that we look at it on an annual basis, so that we don't have this problem in the future.
So item 18, I don't know if there's any questions. Assistant Harbor Master Merlot's not here. Anybody choose to fill in the report, or should we accept this as information?
I just wanted to comment that it seems like this is reorganized, the way these reports are coming now from the harbor masters, and it's really easy to read now, so whatever changed, it's really nice, so I appreciate the changes in the report.
We'll pass that along to them.
No other questions on item 18. Let's move on to Assistant Harbor Master Draper's report, which I guess is part of 18. Any other questions on Killer Point?
I just wanted to point out the level of search and rescue activity here. There's, kind of a lot going on. So just wanted to give my appreciation to the Harbor Patrol for the work that they're doing.
So noted. Okay, we're at Board of Harbor Commissioners Committee Reports, and we do have a unapproved report, item 19.
Both these sets of minutes, by the way, have not been back to the committees, and they're here for informational only. If there are any edits to the minutes, I'd recommend very strongly that those take place in the respective committees.
And let's accept item 19. After it gets referred to the committee, it'll come back. We have unapproved minutes for the Finance Committee. Similar story, hasn't been approved, so we'll pass on that. And I do have a request from Commissioner Chang Corrali to address the board under item C, Commissioner comments.
Just really briefly, thanks so much, Tom. I'm sorry I was a little late today. I got stuck in traffic after being on the road for an hour and 15 minutes. But the one thing that and I'm not sure if y'all talked about this earlier, but the one thing that I would like to make sure that is on track to happen is that we'll have the Brown Act training that we discussed earlier in the year about having. So I don't know if that's on the schedule to happen, because I had also seen, Brown Act, possible Brown Act violations by other commissioners, and I just want to make sure we're all on the same page.
So thank you. We're just huddling. I think we have talked hypothetically about scheduling it in May. We haven't yet figured out an exact date, but we have not forgotten.
Great, thank you.
And I'd just like to follow up on that. I think it's really important that if commissioners are going to allege Brown Act violations, that they back it up with some facts, because I think that to make untrue allegations or vague innuendo isn't serving the best interest of the district. So I'd just like to ask for...
I'd be happy to clarify. In the Strategic Planning Committee meeting, there were 2 commissioners on the committee, and the general manager specifically instructed that a 3rd commissioner who was in the meeting not speak, and she spoke and was, reminded a couple of times. And I'm not accusing anyone of a violation of the Brown Act. I just think that we all could use some training and reminding. That's all.
And I would just like to remind the board that there was no Brown Act violation. So I think it's important that commissioners not make allegations against other commissioners that are unfounded. It really isn't in the best interest of the district.
Okay, we have a closed session item, so we're going to adjourn to closed session at 8:50.